I am standing in a room that has not been above 55 degrees in 140 years. It is August. Outside it is 94. Down here it is 52. There is no air conditioner, no refrigerator, no electricity of any kind. The walls are earth. The ceiling is stone. And every wooden shelf in this space is holding food that will last until April without a single watt of power. I am in the root cellar of an Amish farmhouse outside Millersburg, Ohio. This structure was dug in 1884. It has kept food cold through every summer and prevented it from freezing through every winter since Grover Cleveland was president. The family that lives here has never paid a refrigerator electric bill in their lives. Not because they do not eat fresh food, because they built a hole in the ground that does the same job for free. Stay with me until the end because the last thing I am going to show you is a method you can implement this weekend in your basement for under $50 that will cut your food storage costs permanently. And when you see how simple the physics actually is, you will understand why the refrigeration industry spent 70 years making sure this knowledge stayed buried. The average American household spends $100 to $200 per year on electricity just to run a refrigerator and freezer. Over 30 years, that is $3,000 to $6,000. A root cellar costs between $50 and $500 to build, depending on the method you choose, and it lasts multiple generations with zero operating cost. The difference is not in the effectiveness. Root cellars keep food fresh for months. The difference is in who profits from your dependency. Let me start with the physics because once you understand why this works, the industry suppression becomes impossible to ignore. The temperature of the earth below the frost line, which in most of the United States is between 3 and 5 feet deep, stays at a nearly constant 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. This is not magic. This is thermal mass and geothermal stability. In summer, when the surface temperature climbs to 90 or 100 degrees, the Earth 4 feet down is still 52 degrees. In winter, when the surface drops to 10 or 20 degrees, the Earth 4 feet down is still 52 degrees. The ground acts as a massive heat sink. It absorbs temperature extremes slowly and releases them slowly. By the time seasonal temperature changes penetrate deep enough to affect the subsurface, the season has already shifted and the process reverses. The result is a stable, cool environment that requires no energy input and no mechanical intervention. A root cellar is simply a controlled access point to that stable temperature zone. You dig into the earth, you line the walls to prevent collapse, you ventilate to control humidity, and you store food in an environment that stays between 50 and 55 degrees with 85 to 95% humidity naturally. Most vegetables, root crops, apples, and certain preserved foods last for months in those conditions. Potatoes can store for 6 to 10 months, carrots for 4 to 6 months, winter squash for 3 to 4 months, apples for 3 to 6 months depending on variety, onions for 6 to 8 months, beets and turnips for 3 to 5 months, cabbage for 3 to 5 months. All of this without refrigeration, without electricity, without any recurring cost. The USDA published root cellar construction guides continuously from the 1890s through the 1950s. Land-grant universities including Cornell, Penn State, University of Wisconsin, and Purdue all maintained active research and extension programs on food storage in root cellars as a standard household practice. Then something changed. Between 1950 and 1970, root cellar information disappeared almost completely from mainstream agricultural extension services and home economics curricula. It was not because the technology stopped working, it was because the refrigeration industry had a better business model. In 1944, 44% of American households owned a refrigerator. By 1950, that number had jumped to 80%. By 1960, it was over 90%. The post-war economic boom, rural electrification programs, and aggressive marketing campaigns by General Electric, Frigidaire, and Westinghouse transformed refrigeration from a luxury into a perceived necessity in less than 2 decades. The messaging was clear. Refrigeration was modern. Refrigeration was convenient. Refrigeration was scientific. Root cellars were old-fashioned. Root cellars were primitive. Root cellars were what people did before they had access to better options. But the better option came with a cost. A refrigerator requires electricity. That electricity costs money every month for the entire lifespan of the appliance, and the appliance itself has a planned obsolescence timeline. Modern refrigerators last on average 10 to 15 years before requiring replacement. A root cellar lasts generations. The one I am standing in right now is 140 years old, and it functions as well today as it did in 1884. No parts have been replaced, no maintenance beyond occasional cleaning, no monthly bill, no repair technician. Nothing has broken because there is nothing to break. This is not a romantic return to primitive living. This is a cost structure comparison. One system requires continuous financial input, the other does not. Now let me show you the 3 levels of root cellar construction, because this is not a binary choice between digging a massive underground chamber or doing nothing. There are scalable approaches that work for nearly any living situation and budget. The first level is a basement corner conversion. If you have a basement, you already have access to the stable earth temperature zone. The concrete or stone foundation walls are in direct contact with the ground. That contact transfers the cool, stable temperature into the basement space. The problem is that most basements are heated in winter, and the rest of the house warms them in summer. The solution is to partition off a corner of the basement, insulate it from the interior conditioned space, and provide exterior ventilation. Here is how you do it. Choose a corner on the north side of the basement if possible. Build a simple stud frame wall to separate that corner from the rest of the basement. Insulate the interior side of that wall with standard fiberglass or foam board. Do not insulate the exterior foundation walls. You want those walls exposed to the earth. Install 2 ventilation pipes, one low near the floor on the exterior wall to bring in cool air, one high near the ceiling to exhaust warm air. Cover both vents with screen to keep pests out. Add shelving. You now have a functional root cellar for the cost of basic lumber, insulation, and 2 vent pipes. Total material cost $50 to $100 depending on the size. Storage capacity, several hundred pounds of produce. Operating cost, 0. This works in any home with a basement. The second level is a buried barrel or trash can cellar. This is for people without basements or those who want dedicated outdoor storage. You dig a hole in the ground roughly 4 feet deep and wide enough to fit a large plastic trash can or a 55-gallon food-grade barrel. You place the container in the hole. You backfill around it with soil. You leave the lid accessible at ground level. You create a drainage path to prevent water from pooling inside. You insulate the lid with foam board or straw. Total material cost, $30 to $50 for the container and insulation. You now have 30 to 55 gallons of stable cold storage. In winter, you can store root vegetables, apples, cabbage. In summer, you can use it as a cool box for produce that would otherwise spoil in the heat. This method requires no building skills and takes a few hours to complete. The third level is a traditional walk-in root cellar. This is the structure you see in historical photos and on Amish farms. A partially underground room with a dedicated entrance, full ventilation system, and shelving capacity for hundreds of pounds of food. There are 2 common approaches. The first is a hillside cellar, where you dig into the side of a slope, line the walls with stone or concrete block, install a roof, and create a doorway at ground level. The earth provides insulation on 3 sides. The slope provides natural drainage. The second is a mounded cellar where you dig a rectangular pit, build walls and a roof, and then cover the entire structure with 2 to 3 feet of soil. Both methods use the same ventilation principle. Cool air enters low on the north wall. Warm air exits high on the south wall or through a roof vent. This creates passive airflow driven by temperature differences. No fan, no electricity. Material cost for a traditional cellar depends on size and materials, but typically ranges from $200 to $500 if you are doing the labor yourself. Hiring excavation and masonry work can push costs higher, but the structure will last a century or more with minimal maintenance. Now, I want to show you what actually stores well in a root cellar, because this is not a replacement for a refrigerator in the modern sense. It is a replacement for the specific function of long-term cool storage of certain foods. Root vegetables, including potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, parsnips, rutabagas store extremely well because they are biologically designed to survive underground through winter. They have natural resistance to rot, and their cellular structure tolerates cool, humid conditions. Winter squash, including butternut, acorn, and Hubbard, store well because their thick skins prevent moisture loss. Apples store well if you choose the right varieties. Late-season apples like Fuji, Granny Smith, and Arkansas Black have dense flesh and thick skins that hold up for months. Early-season apples like Gala and Macintosh spoil quickly. Onions and garlic store well if they are properly cured. After harvest, you dry them in a warm, airy space for 2 to 3 weeks until the outer skins are papery. Then you store them in mesh bags or hanging braids. Cabbage stores well if you pull the entire plant, including roots, and hang it upside down or wrap it in newspaper. Canned goods, preserved foods, and certain cheeses also benefit from the stable, cool environment. What does not store well in a root cellar? Fresh greens, tomatoes, peppers, and most summer produce. These require refrigeration or immediate consumption. But here is the important point. A household using a root cellar is not trying to replicate every function of a refrigerator. They are strategically using the right storage method for each type of food. Fresh summer vegetables are eaten fresh or preserved through canning or fermentation. Root crops and winter keepers go into the cellar. The result is a significant reduction in refrigeration dependency and a massive reduction in food waste. The USDA estimates that American households waste 30 to 40% of the food they purchase. A substantial portion of that waste is produce that spoils in the refrigerator before it gets used. Root cellars reduce that waste dramatically because the food stays in optimal storage conditions for the entire duration of its natural shelf life. Now let me connect this to the suppression timeline, because the disappearance of root cellar knowledge was not accidental. Between 1945 and 1960, the refrigeration industry was consolidating. General Electric, Frigidaire, and Westinghouse were not just selling appliances, they were selling a vision of the modern American home. That vision required electricity, lots of it. The rural electrification programs funded by the federal government in the 1930s and 40s had wired most of the country. Now the appliance manufacturers needed to convert that access into consumption. Refrigerators became the flagship product. The marketing was relentless. Magazine ads, radio spots, television commercials, all pushing the same message. The modern housewife does not store food in a cellar. She stores it in a refrigerator. By 1960, the cultural shift was complete. Home economics textbooks stopped including root cellar construction. Agricultural extension services stopped publishing storage guides. The knowledge did not vanish entirely. It survived in rural communities, particularly among populations that maintained older household practices for cultural or religious reasons. The Amish never stopped building root cellars. Neither did many Mennonite communities. Neither did some rural families in Appalachia, the upper Midwest, and northern New England. But for mainstream suburban and urban America, the knowledge became invisible. And once it was invisible for one generation, it became forgotten by the next. The family I am visiting in Ohio built this cellar in 1884. They have used it continuously since then. Their children use it. Their grandchildren will use it. The cost to build it in 1884 was approximately $12 in labor and materials based on the family records. Adjusted for inflation, that is roughly $400 in modern currency. The operating cost over 140 years has been zero. The refrigerator did not make the root cellar obsolete. The refrigerator made the root cellar unprofitable for the companies selling refrigerators. And those companies had the marketing budgets to make sure you never learned the difference. I want to ask you one direct question. If you could store 6 months of potatoes, carrots, apples, squash, onions, and cabbage in a space that cost $50 to $200 to build and nothing to operate, would that change how you think about food storage? Leave your answer in the comments, because I am using those responses to decide what to cover next. If you believe that practical knowledge has been quietly displaced to protect someone else's quarterly earnings, you already know what comes next.